I am not encouraging or advising anyone to modify their firearms. This is for entertainment and educational purposes only. You can get way into the weeds with extractor fitting and tuning. I certainly have in the past, and it didn't do me a lot of good. All the extra checks and measurements quickly got into the realm of diminishing returns for my time and effort and made no noticeable difference in function or reliability. What I will present here are the methods that have been working well for me, what I measure, check, consider, and modify during installation, and how I tune them. I'll leave some good resources in the description if you want to venture into the weeds yourself. There are also links to some good extractor fitting videos so you can see methods other than what I present here. I'll be using this extractor from EGW. They call it their practical extractor. I've used their improved GI extractor a number of times, but this one's $15 cheaper, so I wanted to try it out. Supposedly it's just as robust and reliable and has a similar service life, but it's a bit easier to tune. There are many different styles offered by different manufacturers. They can be made out of different materials. I don't get too hung up on that, mainly just start with one that is for the correct caliber. Down there in my extractor hole, you can see there's some pretty nasty burrs hanging down from where they drilled this optic screw hole. So I got to get in there and clean those up before I install my extractor. I need to fit the groove in the extractor to my firing pin plate, which retains the extractor. This brings us to the first important consideration, the hook to breech face dimension. For 45 ACP, I generally see 75 to 85 thou. I did the math on the ordnance dimensions, and that range ends up being 75 to 92. 9mm, I've seen 65 to 75 thou. Based on my experience, I agree with these given ranges. Measure the front of the groove in the extractor to the back side of the hook. You can stick something in the groove like the firing pin plate if it's not too tight. Measure from here to the breech face on the slide and subtract those two values to get the hook to breech face dimension. I have 76 thou. That's on the long end of the range for 9mm extractors. So I will take material off here and bring that hook back a smidge. It will only be a thou or two. I believe the conventional wisdom is to remove material from the front of the groove so it pulls the hook closer to the breech face, but it's also easy to measure so you know where material should come off. I want a nice slip fit with the plate, so installation is easy, but there's no fore-aft play in the extractor. Get in there with a small file that has a dead edge so you don't cut this groove any deeper. After I got the fit that I want, I also do generally kind of break some sharp edges around this groove. I just remeasured this and I brought my hook to breech face dimension in 3/1000 of an inch. If this groove right here is too shallow and it's too tight on this face of the firing pin plate, you could cut the groove deeper on the extractor. I think the material should be removed from the extractor because if you take material off the sides of the plate, you're going to loosen up the fit with the groove in the slide. Fore-aft play here, or a gap with the side of the firing pin plate that allows the extractor to rotate, could make it grab the case rim slightly differently from shot to shot, which could cause inconsistent ejection. So I'm just going to put some initial tension on this extractor so it will hold the case in place. This tension method and the tension test I will show later are explained in an Atlas Gunworks video. There's a link to that in the description. I install the firing pin plate to hold the extractor in the correct fore-aft position. I push a cartridge or a case up underneath the extractor claw and hold it firm up against the breech face. I want to make sure I don't have contact on this taper here or the case in front of the case rim area. You can see that when I try to push the case up against the breech face, the front of that hook is interfering right here on this taper. So this is the second key consideration. I have to have clearance on this end with the taper and case in front of the case rim. I can't bring the hook back anymore by taking more material off the front face of this groove without loosening up the fit of the extractor on the firing pin plate. I've seen some people cut the groove to their desired hook to breech face dimension and install a shim to tighten the groove back up on the plate. That's way too much work. The operable range for the hook to breech face dimension is wide enough you shouldn't need to fuck with that. Maybe if you're restoring a pistol and want to keep all the original parts or something. I have contact here where I don't want it with the case, so I will be taking material off the front of this until it just clears. Most new extractors have a little bit extra material compared to the GI design, so I'm not really worried about weakening the hook by doing this. Now I can hold my case up against the breech face and I can see that the extractor hook is not jamming up against this taper right here on the case. For those that are curious, the distance from this hook face to right here should be 25 to 30 thousandths, and kind of just eyeballing it, I think I'm right around 25. It's definitely not the best way to measure that though. At this point, I'm also gonna put my barrel in the slide and push it into the lockup position and make sure that I have clearance between the head of the extractor and this little chamber face relief on the barrel, and I have a gap there, so we're good to go. If I didn't have a gap, I would take material off of this face of the extractor. Finally, the last important consideration, I check that the correct part of the extractor tip is contacting the case rim area. For 9mm, it should be contacting right here on the tip of that hook. But for 45 ACP, it contacts in here. So on 45, if the hook tip was contacting before this tensioning pad, I would take material off the hook tip. The spec for this hook height from here to here is 30 to 34 thousandths on a GI extractor. You can get pretty crazy with measuring extractor, deflection, and tension. They're closely coupled. The extractor is a spring. The deflection or displacement this way will result in applied force on the case rim that way. There's a component of that tension that is a result of preload. So a different preload would result in a different final tension with the same deflection. Again, kind of getting into the weeds. I adjust it based on the method laid out in that Atlas video, and it's worked well for me a lot of times on 45 and 9mm pistols. I adjust it to get the tension such that the cartridge will hang in there for a few shakes before falling out. So that's actually about right. You know, if you keep adjusting it and trying to add tension, but you can't get enough tension for it to pass that test, it probably means that material needs taken off this fitting pad right here. This creates clearance so that the hook can go further that way, which will allow enough room for proper deflection and preload for correct tension on the case rim. I want the case rim to have an easier time sliding up under the extractor hook. So I create a radius here. This one already has a little chamfer. This will help the case push the extractor hook to the side. A radius right here on this corner will do the same thing if it contacts the case forward of the rim area at all as the case is sliding up in there. I also bevel this corner right here. It will give clearance for and help guide the case rim in as the cartridge is tilted coming out of the magazine or as it's riding up the barrel ramp. I polish the geometry that I just established, the bevel here, the radius here, this radius right here, but I don't polish here or the hook face right here. I don't really want to reduce friction where the extractor hook will be trying to hold on to the case rim during cycling and ejection. I chamfer this corner and this back edge and this back edge. It gives it a little more clearance in the extractor bore and makes installation and removal a little bit easier. You can see that this one already had the chamfers here and here on it, which I like. This one doesn't have those, so I generally add them. In this case, the extractor is actually pretty flush with the back of the slide, but I still have material to take off here to blend it into the frame. So usually there will be more material sticking out proud out the back of the slide. I know it'll get worn off for the most part, but I do like to touch up the areas I modified with cold blue and put some oil on them. I'll talk about this more kind of as I get to the final assembly and tuning and test firing of the pistol, but most commonly, incorrect extractor tension is just going to cause inconsistent ejection. An extractor that's too tight can sometimes not allow the case rim to come up underneath it, and it will bind it right here. So you get a failure to feed where the round goes up and hits into the hood of the chamber like this. Next, I needed to check my extractor adjustment. I picked this test up from 10.8 Performance. Shout out to Hilton Yam. Chamber around, then take the mag out and fire. When the case is extracted out of the chamber, there's no longer another round under it to support it, but the extractor tension should be enough to hold it in place on the breech face. If the tension's inadequate, the ejection will look different than when the mag is inserted, because the case can move around on the breech face and hit the ejector in a different spot. My extractor tension was just fine.